Hello and welcome to Swalif with me, Hamad Amari. Swalif means chats, where we're going to be swalifing together. My first guest in this podcast is Jennifer Bennett, and we will be talking about volunteerism. And why Jennifer? Well, Jennifer has been the Director of Training and Education at VolunteerMatch for 13 years, so a seasoned industry expert when it comes to volunteerism, and I'm lucky to be able to chat with her today for an hour at least. We'll see how far the Swalif go. Jennifer is also a contributor to the new Volunteer Managers Toolkit, the Volunteer Engagement 2.0 Ideas and Insights that are challenging the world, published by VolunteerMatch in 2015. Also, a co-host of her very own podcast alongside Toby Johnson called Time and Talent, where their first season had 9 episodes talking about how more corporate organizations or community leaders can create creative ways for more volunteering and more spaces for career options and opportunities through their organizations by understanding and opening the doors for more volunteers. So let's talk with Jennifer.
Good morning for me and good night for you, my guest from all the way from the west coast of America, Jennifer Bennett. Good night.
Oh. Thank you. Good evening.
I have one question to kind of set us to start the conversation. Do volunteers get paid? That's the first concern. That was the first question I had.
Sometimes, for the most part, voluntary work is unpaid, but there are volunteers that may receive a stipend for the work that they do. Some volunteers may get reimbursed for things like travel or parking or for expenses, but in general, no, there's not a sort of set wage or a set salary for volunteers.
What I'm hoping to do is learn a lot from you in this conversation about volunteerism. And the main concern that I have is trying to get people to understand it is a huge field. Because as I was doing the research, it was a lot bigger than I anticipated. So just so you understand kind of where I stand when it came to volunteering. I just thought it was nice people queuing up outside of places where they have volunteering signs. And then they would just go and throw their name in a hat and they'll go, oh, yes. And everyone will just welcome them because, oh, yes, we have more hands or more people.
Right.
But that's not the case, is it?
No, that's not the case at all.
Okay, cool.
It's a pretty big industry here in the States and, in other places around the world. We call it the third sector here because it comes after for-profit and government. It's the third largest area where people are employed. So not everyone in a nonprofit organization is a volunteer. It's usually a mix of paid staff and volunteer staff, although there are, quite a few all volunteer-run organizations that may organize around an event or an issue within their community. But most of the organizations in the United States that are engaging volunteers are large organizations, with paid staff and big budgets and in some cases, thousands or tens of thousands of volunteers.
Okay, let's go take it a couple of steps back.
Yeah.
Before you become the person you are today, the life that you were on.
Yeah.
From early teens, university, was this something that you were going for? Was this a fluke? Did you go and study for volunteer coordination, or did you study systems and volunteering and people management? Just tell me more about where did it doesn't register that someone would go, oh, I'm going to go and study this. And I will be a volunteer coordinator for 13 years. How do you get there?
I did not study this in school. I grew up in a family that did volunteer. Both of my parents volunteered. It was part of our life growing up, giving back, volunteering with the schools, volunteering in the community. I got my degree in political philosophy, which is not super useful in a lot of ways. So, yeah, you can laugh. It's kind of funny.
I'm laughing at the fact that you said it's not super useful. I mean, there's a lot of people that would contend that in this region. They probably go, "Hey, maybe maybe we need
Well,
some of that."
it is kind of useful. It's helpful in sort of understanding a lot of what happens both in the past and is happening now, because it's a lot about what rights you give up to join a community. So it is super relevant. It's just there's not a ton of jobs out there where they're like, oh, we're looking for a political philosophy major for this. So I did consider law school. That was sort of the path I thought I was going in. And after I got out of school, sort of looked around and thought I wanted to, well, I ended up first volunteering and then working at wildlife rehabilitation and conservation organizations. So that was sort of my childhood dream. I always loved animals. There were a couple of pretty serious oil spills on the West Coast of the United States. And so I sort of got pushed into that. And that's how I got started working with volunteers, because volunteers wanted to help, right? Exactly what you're talking about. They show up, they see a problem, there's birds on the shore covered in oil. And, I thought that they could use better training, more support, better systems, making sure that they were safe and that the animals were safe. And that's how I got into volunteer engagement. It was definitely not a plan. And I think for most people who do this kind of work, we talk about being an accidental volunteer manager. So you get started by connecting with an organization and caring about the mission. And many animal people are not always good people. So the fact that I had some people skills, I think helped push me in this direction in my career. And I worked at the San Francisco Bar Association here, working with pro bono attorneys. So that's sort of the other side of volunteer engagement, skills-based volunteers. And then I found VolunteerMatch, and it was a perfect fit for me. It's what I love to do. I love to inspire others. I love to provide resources so that people can better engage volunteers in their organization. And I get to talk to people all around the world about volunteer engagement. So it's a really nice fit.
One question is, you've been at VolunteerMatch for 13 years.
I have.
Then that number alone, it's like, ask me if I could stay in the same place for 3 years, I'd probably be like, but 13 years, what keeps you going? What are the,
Yeah.
And also you kind of just quietly mentioned that you were in the San Francisco bar. So maybe, and what was your title there, just so that everyone?
Oh, yeah, I was the membership director there. The California State Bar is the one that administers the exam and gives people their law license or their ability to practice law. The San Francisco Bar Association is a professional association. So it's where local lawyers would come to get continuing legal education or to network or to do their pro bono work, which is what we helped with. So that idea that even as a lawyer, you don't just go out and find someone on the street and say hey, do you need a lawyer? You want to make sure that you're, doing pro bono work that's in sort of a structured, planned kind of way. And we worked with a lot of the large law firms here to put together those pro bono plans or programs so that the leadership didn't have to try to say yes or no. They could come to us and say, can you help these lawyers find pro bono opportunities in the community? So
there's a lot I want to talk to you about. And because I just opened my eyes to something that I was completely oblivious to. The more I read, I realized that it's human resource management, it's systems, standardization, corporate culture, and change management. And there's so many things that, whether on your podcast you talked about with your guests, or whether it was articles on your blog, or just the network on that you were, or the titles and accolades that you're mentioning. it seems like for someone who's completely oblivious to it, as I said, it was, you just walk in and they'll pick you up because they need extra help. I had no idea that there was 4 stages. Like there's recruitment, which is one, screening, orientation, and training. The fact that just so recruitment is, that's what I thought it was. I thought that's where it stopped. And maybe I even understand recruitment wrong, because that's more of an active thing. You have to go and recruit. Whereas it's not, but if it was just like an open door policy where everyone could walk in, that's not recruitment. That's like a a shelter, I guess.
There definitely are roles where I call them sort of low barrier to entry, right? So we're going to do a park cleanup. Anyone can show up. Everyone's welcome. You don't need any particular training. We might do some orientation to say, like, here's where we're going to put the recycling, and here's what we're going to do if we find something that's too heavy for one person to lift, right? Sort of that kind of management. And there are a lot of organizations out there that don't need to recruit, right? They're very well known in their community, or they have already connections in place. But for most organizations, they're putting the message out there, sort of like, hey, we need help. Here's who we're looking for. Here's what will be different or better if you spend your time with us. Here are maybe some of the benefits of volunteering with us, learning a new skill or solving a problem in your community. And here are the next steps. Here's how you get involved. I would also say, to your list of 4, there's probably a 5th that's really about relationship building, so that once the volunteer is trained and deployed within your organization, that they are supported and supervised and then recognized. They're told, sort of the impact of their work, why it matters, how they're making a difference, and that sort of perpetuates that training and recognition and support and relationship building, kind of create that loop that keeps going.
So the evolution of it, you've been there for quite some time.
Yeah.
How much of a hand do you have in kind of shaping where volunteerism is today? What was it like when you first got into it?
That's a really good question. I think, with everything that's going on here in the States, with minimal response to the pandemic, we are definitely at a turning point for volunteer engagement. So many organizations just closed their doors in the middle of March. And unfortunately, many of them felt that last piece that I was talking about, that relationship piece, didn't matter. So they closed their doors, furloughed their volunteer managers, and just pretended like they didn't have volunteers, just cut all those ties, cut those relationships, didn't even send out a note like, things are up in the air, we'll get back to you, just like closed the doors behind them and turned off the lights. I personally think that many of those volunteers will not come back, right? That's a violation of that relationship. That's a breaking of trust. So a lot of organizations that have depended on volunteers, particularly older adult volunteers, may never get those volunteers back. So it's maybe too dangerous for them to go back and volunteer in a public environment. They may feel like they have been abandoned by these organizations that they've been with, in some cases, for decades. And I think it's going to be a rude awakening when they decide to reopen their doors in a few months or 6 months and the volunteers aren't there. So that's, I think, going to be really interesting to see what happens and how organizations respond to that. We also have a lot of nonprofit organizations that are probably not reopening because of funding and the financial situation. So it's kind of hard to know. I wish I had a crystal ball. On the other side of that, we have those organizations that are providing needs, direct services to clients, food insecurity, housing insecurity. In some cases, the needs have quadrupled, but the funding hasn't, and they have to keep their volunteers physically distanced. So they're trying to meet this increased need without that sort of core of volunteers that they used to have. So it's a really transitional time. But to get to your question about the history, this sort of formalization of volunteer engagement happened in the 1980s is sort of when it started to come about. And I think we went as a field, as an industry, sort of too far towards human resources. There are definitely overlaps and parallels, and a lot of the tools that you use to organize people are the same because, of course, volunteers are people, but it's different, right? When I have a job, I have either an explicit contract or an implicit contract. You are paying me to show up. Even if I don't feel like it, I'm probably still gonna go because I got bills to pay. When you're a volunteer, you don't have that, right? So we have to tap into that other motivation. Volunteers need to know what's in it for them, what they're getting out of it, how they're making a difference. Otherwise, I'll just sit on my couch and watch Netflix or go out to dinner with my friends. Well, not right now, at least not in the United States, but other places.
Wear a mask. You gotta wear a mask. So you work with NGOs and corporates and community. Who's your audience? How do you get into that? Like, how do you even, because in my head, it's like, okay, if I was gonna hire, I would go to a recruitment agency, and based on the job role, they will find and match the best candidate based on my requirements and budgets and things like that. When it's community versus corporate versus NGOs and then having that long lasting relationship as well, obviously very important for recruitment and retention. Is that mostly a corporate thing, an NGO thing? What kind of audiences are you working with, and which ones do you feel are the ones that are going to be challenged the most when, as you said, 6 to 10 months from now, potentially?
So it's really sort of a three-sided marketplace or, relationship in the community, if you will. You have your agencies, your organizations. They could be government organizations, it might be city government that's deploying volunteers. You'll have faith-based organizations in that category as well, community-based organizations, sort of all of those receivers of volunteers that deploy people into the community to do good work. So they may be what we would call a nonprofit here, meaning they're tax exempt. They may be a charity or an agency. At VolunteerMatch, at my organization, we use those relatively interchangeably because we think of people who need volunteers to come in and help. So that's sort of one side of the marketplace. And then the other side of our marketplace is split a little bit into the people who are the volunteers. So those could be students doing service learning. Those could be community members who want to put some skills to use or learn new skills or just solve a problem that they see. And then that other half of that sort of third side of the marketplace are the companies that we work with, where they deploy their employees as volunteers as part of their corporate social responsibility. So they kind of all fit together, and you have to balance it out the best that you can. But there is, I think, a push-pull. You need to design, as an agency, as an organization that needs volunteers, you need to design opportunities that are compelling and interesting and impact-driven. And as a volunteer, you want to find those things that resonate with you. We are definitely seeing a shift in sort of the social contract and the way volunteering happened not even that long ago, the 80s or even the 90s, where there was social sort of responsibility. You think of like your service clubs and businessmen being part of the Kiwanis Club, and, moms volunteering with the PTA. And now everybody's so busy. Everybody, has 2 jobs, or 3 jobs. And to carve out that time to volunteer, it has to be something that really matters to those volunteers. That's how you keep them coming back. That's how you keep them connected to your organization. So that has changed too with the recent shifts and people maybe being more focused on finding paid work or focused on work that they can do from home. So we are seeing that shift in volunteerism as well to what we would call virtual volunteering or remote volunteering. So I'm not going into an office or going into a facility to volunteer. I'm doing it from my home so that I can stay physically distanced.
For someone like me in Qatar, why should I volunteer? And obviously one of the biggest events in the world is going to happen in less than 2 years, the FIFA World Cup. That's definitely something that you're going to need volunteers for, whether it's logistics or security or communication, media. Someone somewhere is going to need an extra pair of hands to welcome the 4 million people who are going to be coming here, hopefully. I don't know, don't quote me on that being an exact number, but I'm guessing it's going to be a lot of people. And what would you say to someone who really, like in my position, excuse my ignorance, knows nothing about it? Like, I just think that, yeah, I'm healthy, I'm young, I'm fit. I'll go stand on a gate and make sure no one comes in. Like, you know what I mean? But
get a snazzy vest and maybe like a flashlight or something.
Yeah, get one of those, the airport things.
Yeah. A walkie-talkie.
There you go. Yeah. Make myself feel important. I really shouldn't be trusted with that. Like, I shouldn't be trusted with anything that emits light because I'll do crazy things.
Good to know.
Yes. So is that part of my application with you now, Jennifer? Like,
I would probably, yeah. If I was going to put you in charge of a gate that people needed to not go through, I would probably ask you some questions about how you feel about following rules, how you feel about sort of standing up for yourself and standing up for the policies. What I wouldn't want to do is put somebody on that gate who's going to feel uncomfortable speaking up, or somebody who's going to take this as an opportunity to wield a small amount of power.
Oh, that's definitely me.
That's so definitely me.
I will own and protect that gate. Yeah. I will be the person. I will be literally the gatekeeper. Yeah. Right. And and I will use everything in me to become more powerful. Just be like, no. So I have an ID. I can come in and I have a gate, but no. What's the magic word?
Yes, I would be concerned about that. I would want somebody who feels confident speaking up, but not somebody who's going to maybe pick a fight with somebody. That's not what I'm looking for in that gatekeeper role. So
why did this get violent, Jennifer?
How did this happen?
I'm sure if we go into stories of people, and is there really a document that can help people deal with people where it comes, you're dealing with people from all over different communities, different backgrounds, different ethnicities, beliefs, you're always dealing with different people. So is there really a place where you can say, this is how you treat people in this position, this is how people in this position ought to be? Is it that? Like, how? I'm sure it's not that rigid. I'm sure the structure for delivery and when there's deliverables and things like that, you can measure that kind of metric. But when it's just interaction with people who are probably new, never met each other, you never, is the common cause is one thing, but then it's interactions, little
Oh,
cultural
right.
nuances and things like that. I mean, that alone should be, like it's a huge thing dealing with other people.
It is, and it's hard, and it can be complex. You asked, why would somebody want to volunteer? And that's the first question I ask a prospective volunteer. Why do you want to volunteer? Why did you come to my organization? What do you want to accomplish with your time? Do you have like a hard goal? I want to learn how to use Photoshop as a volunteer so that I can use that in my career, right? Or build a website or whatever that might be. But a lot of times people say, oh, I'm just here to help. I just don't want to do whatever you need me to do. Like, where do you want me to volunteer? And I dig deeper, because if I don't find that match, if I don't find that place that somebody's going to be comfortable, I might be putting them into that position where they're going to feel uncomfortable, or they're not going to know what to do innately. So I try to find that sort of fit between characteristics and goals, and then provide screening and training and support, right? So we want to take advantage of what a person's natural inclination is to do in that situation. So I mentioned I would probably not put you in front of a gate as a gatekeeper. I want somebody who might, speak up and say, oh, I'm sorry, this is only for athletes or media. And if somebody got a little bit pushy, they would call in their supervisor, or they would say, well, I think you can go around, or this volunteer can take you to that entrance point for you. More of a problem solver, somebody who wants to be helpful by nature, and then find a way to give them an experience that's satisfying for them, right? I want everybody to succeed as a great volunteer. And part of my job is making sure that I'm setting them up to succeed by finding a good fit for them, and then giving them the training and support to handle those situations as they come up.
So we really didn't actually define your job yet.
Oh.
So just go for it, because I went straight into it. Apologies. Tell us about your role, VolunteerMatch. It's been a long, long time.
Right. Oh, great. You asked that, and then we got distracted by other things.
It happens with me. There's a lot of distraction.
So yeah, I've been at VolunteerMatch for 13 years, and I came on board to build out VolunteerMatch's volunteer engagement strategy. So VolunteerMatch is an online platform where organizations can post their open volunteer opportunities, and people can come and set up a search, find something that resonates with them or that they connect with, and then get in touch with the organization through our platform. It's a little bit like Match.com, but for volunteerism, right? It's all user-generated content. The filters sort of point you in the right direction based on what you're looking for. My role, so I started as the person who was going to build out our volunteer engagement strategy. And our CEO loves it when I tell this story, because all I ever want is for him to tell me that I am right. And, he probably wouldn't even have to pay me that much, as long as he would just say that. And so I started, and we engage not a ton of volunteers. It's about a dozen volunteers a year, sometimes 24 volunteers a year. And I looked at this role, and I looked at what I anticipated it being, and I realized it wasn't really a full-time job. And I didn't want to look for a new job, right? I didn't want them to realize that I could do this job in a few hours a week. So back with in my wildlife rehabilitation days and with the Bar Association, I had done a lot of professional development for other people who are leading and engaging volunteers. And so I said to Greg Baldwin, who's our CEO, I think we should start to do some trainings and some resource development for organizations that are engaging volunteers. And he said, I think that's a bad idea. I think we're a platform. It's not our role to take a stand. It's not our role to try to shift the field. And I said, I strenuously disagree. So I'm going to do it anyway.
I think I now know what keeps you going for 13 years. It's making sure Greg says you're right.
I do like to
tell
I like to tell the story when he's here or when he's nearby, so that he can acknowledge that I was right and he was wrong. And
but you know what? We'll cut this part just for you to send to him. How about that?
Oh, he knows. I mean, this isn't a secret. Like, he knows that this is part of what keeps me coming back. But the other side of it is that, I train somewhere between 12 and 15,000 volunteer managers a year, and things like this expand that reach. So I have the opportunity to help those people do a better job engaging volunteers. So that's why I do it, and that's why I keep coming back, because I think there's so much to say.
12,000 to 15,000 volunteers a year.
Volunteer managers a year.
Volunteer managers. So other people who will go out and
exactly.
That's a lot. That's a big number. That's like, I can't fathom that many people is in, what's going on there. Like,
so lots of webinars. Before this year, I would go to a lot of conferences. Now I'm doing a lot of virtual conferences. It's mostly, we do somewhere between 6 and 8 webinars a month, and on all kinds of topics. My job is essentially this: talking about volunteer engagement, sharing resources, helping people make those connections or find solutions within their organization, and then giving them some help and some support to make those changes happen. You mentioned change management. That's a huge piece of what leaders of volunteers do. And, it's hard. It's hard to convince people that they should do something differently. So right now I'm spending a lot of time talking about the impact that the pandemic has had. How do we move forward? How do we stay in touch with volunteers? How do we start to plan for what reopening could look like, especially when we figure that we will probably have to open and close for a while here, because people don't like to wear masks.
I don't like to wear a mask. I just know that it's,
right, because you're not selfish, and you're not.
I mean, I don't like it. I don't like a lot of things that I do, but you just do them because
because it's the right thing to do. Yeah.
Like, if it was up to me, I'd never indicate. I would never indicate ever. I would just do what I want. I'll change lanes. Yeah. I would do donuts in the middle of the road. But I can't. Right. I sometimes don't indicate, and then I look at the person I am, and I'm not happy with the person who's not indicating. Yeah. You know what I mean? So I go, you know what? Let me indicate. That's how I feel about the masks.
Right, because we all live together in the society where we need to make sure we're taking care of others. It's really strange, and I don't know how much you want to go into sort of the history of, we did talk about my political philosophy degree.
If you want to, the floor is yours. But I think we focus more on there's a lot of points that we need to get to, because of the reason I asked about the evolution. Right. Is 13 years ago. Well, when was that? It was 2007. So that would have been, Facebook just started to get big. It was like the early, today, how many platforms do you have? You have YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, LinkedIn, BuzzFeed. It's like Pinterest, Tumblr. You know what I mean? And whereas when you first started, that physical the physical trainings, the physical engagement that you were doing, am I right in thinking that it was in a much larger scale than it is today?
Actually, no. So VolunteerMatch we launched our website in 1998. So we were 1.0, we were around with Craigslist and, sort of the beginnings of the internet. So we've been online from the beginning. So I started doing webinars mid 2007. So, there are definitely more webinars and virtual conferences now, but even last year I was on the road, 1 to 2 weeks out of every month. So even just last year, there's still a lot of in-person trainings. And I think that there's that need to connect people who work with volunteers. It's probably the same in other fields as well. You get that re-energizing of talking to people who understand what it's like to do your job. So I think there's some of that in person. The things that have changed, I think I would say, definitely the corporate social responsibility piece. We have seen that get both more formalized and then more flexible. We have seen, certainly during the Obama administration, we saw a lot of government support for national service. So things like AmeriCorps, Peace Corps, Senior Corps, government funded volunteering, essentially. You mentioned, you asked if people get paid. Volunteers that volunteer through national service receive a stipend, right, to do that work because it's sort of full-time volunteering. So that has been a transition that we've seen. And now I think just every day is a transition. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. We're frantically trying to provide resources for organizations and for volunteers and companies to help them volunteer safely in a pandemic or engage volunteers remotely. And so who knows what that looks like. I don't think I'm going back to a conference in person anytime soon. So, it's sort of the world is now online.
And from your audience perspective, what kind of, do you not, in that 13 years that do you not see a different shape or a different type of audience, like the way that you would attract or try and recruit people 13 years ago surely should have changed, and the mindset of people 13 years ago maybe would have been different towards volunteering than it is today. So where do you see the similarities, if any, and the changes, and how big, if they are, those changes, if there are any?
Yeah. Definitely more people and more organizations. So when I started at VolunteerMatch in 2007, it would take us about 2.5 years to add 1 million connections between a volunteer and an organization. And now we do that in about 9 months. So some months are, busier than others. It's been slow with everything that's going on. It's definitely more people out there, more organizations. We now have about 130,000 organizations that post with us, and about 100,000 opportunities. That was sort of pre-pandemic. I don't know exactly what it is right now. That number is definitely down. But 100,000 opportunities to search through on a given day.
And if I was in Qatar, an institute in Qatar, could I log on to VolunteerMatch and list my wish list for volunteers? Does it work? Will it work? Okay.
It will work. We are only in English. That is sort of our drawback. We have not figured out mass translation.
I think I've done well carrying this conversation. No, I understand. No,
I mean internationally, yes. So
yes, I know. So if you would want to develop it into Arabic and things like that to attract more and then grow more, but right now you're only English.
Only in English. So like if we wanted to expand into Asia or expand into South America, or, we all have large audiences here in the States and in Canada, in Australia, and a few other countries where we have found partners that we could work with, because we do verify all the organizations that set up an account with us. We want to make sure that the organizations are who they say they are, that they are registered charities with their within their countries, and that there's a way to verify that information. So really our international expansion has been limited by the less structured approach to charities in many parts of the world.
Do you think you're underrated? Do you really think, because I mean, I'm thinking you're talking like, it's an ocean. It's huge. These are like little things that we're talking about and touching on. And I feel like just because the word volunteerism,
Mm-hmm.
you're not, if it was corporate international standardization organization of wellness and corporate wellness and corporate
And making money or
know,
something. Yeah.
like, wow, but because I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but
Yeah.
do you feel like it's, if I can say this, is it still, are there still places in the world where volunteering
Mm-hmm.
is not taken seriously? And it's like, why, what am I going to go and do? Why should I volunteer? Me? I'm worth so much. Why should I?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like my time is precious. Why should I go volunteer?
I think that, yes, I think there is sort of maybe a misunderstanding. We do talk a lot about terminology. Is the word volunteer a negative? Do people hear that and think something? I would say even in the States, there's a misunderstanding of the role of volunteers and what volunteerism really is. Traditionally in this country, it has been well-educated, underemployed white women who volunteer. It's that stay-at-home mom, right? Like the Donna Reeds or the June Cleaver, Leave It to Beaver. Kids go to school and the moms go to volunteer. And so it still has some of that stigma attached to it. And honestly, volunteerism and volunteer management in the States has a diversity problem. Most of the people who volunteer and most of the people who lead volunteers look like me. And
for some people, that's not a good thing.
Well, it's not
Maybe.
Always welcoming, right?
Yeah.
So if everybody who volunteers and the person who's leading volunteer management looks like me and you don't look like me, I might say you're welcome, but it may not feel comfortable to walk into a room where you're the only person who looks like you or the only person who has the same background that you do. So we need to do better as organizations. We need to build relationships. It's not that volunteering isn't happening in other communities or in communities of color. It's that it's happening in a different way and it's happening with different terminology. So you may be volunteering through your faith-based community, you may be helping out a neighbor. It has different meanings or different terms, but it's still all about the same thing. And we need to figure out how to make volunteering available to everyone who wants to volunteer.
Can you just briefly explain micro volunteering, please?
Oh, sure. I think what you're talking about are, low barrier to entry, easily done, short-term, kind of get in, get out, oftentimes done by large groups of people. So sort of a crowdsourced approach to volunteerism. Is that what you're talking about micro volunteering?
Yeah. Well, I coined the term from an article I read, I think you wrote. So what I understood from it is that in the challenges of the communities and the pockets of communities and the increasing diversity and making sure that you build these relationships with communities so that you're not just saying people are welcome.
Yeah.
That where possible, you would kind of fit the right people together or fit the right kind of like-minded, kind of community ways of thinking, or you would try and match people that would reduce the risk of conflict, or would reduce the risk of different ideologies coming to clash in a certain service or in a team kind of. Let's say it was the low entry barrier beach clean project. Is everyone that loves the beach and wants to be there doesn't necessarily believe the same thing, right? They all have a common goal of yes, the beach should be clean and we're here to clean it. But if it's like-minded and understanding from your screening process, which is another thing, by the way, I didn't know that there was screening. Like, I didn't know. Right? I was like, what do you mean you have to screen them? Yes, you do, because obviously it's people. You're managing a group of people, and conflicts and tension might arise.
Yeah.
So what is micro volunteering, and the way I understood it, the way it's kind of reducing, it's a kind of risk mitigating factor of people in conflict in areas that are
I'm not sure I would use the term micro volunteering for that. And the way micro volunteering sort of comes together is this idea that it can be done relatively quickly, but I do think that there's a connection there to diversifying who gets to be a volunteer, right?
Okay.
So traditionally, those sort of, leave it to Beaver volunteer moms, they're volunteering Wednesday from 1 until 3, right? And they're doing that every day, every week, month in, month out, year in, year out. If I am a single parent, if I work a job that takes place during normal business hours, plus maybe I have a side hustle, or I'm going back to school, that 1 to 3 hour shift, 1 to 3 p.m. shift isn't going to work for me, right? I'm not going to be able to volunteer during that time. So when we think about diversifying volunteer engagement, we have to think about opportunities that maybe can be done at home in the evening. And we're certainly talking about that now during a pandemic, talking about things that can be done during free time. And that's where micro volunteering can fit in, because micro volunteering is oftentimes activities that can be picked up and done and then put down for a little while and then picked up again, and don't require significant amounts of training or significant amounts of investment. So I don't have to take 40 hours of training to be able to do this activity. If I'm going into work with hospice, for example, I'm going in to help families go through an end of life transition. I have training, I have classroom work, and then probably on the job training before I'm allowed to go and do that kind of work, because it is so fraught emotionally, and there are things that you need to be aware of, and all of that. And that's where some of that screening comes in as well. We don't just want any old person going into a family's home while they're dealing with a family member at the end of their life and like, oh, this platter looks nice, I'm going to take it home with me, or whatever, right? We don't want that happening.
It's the pigs in the blanket. Pigs in the blanket and cheese. Oh, of course I'm going to be stealing that. There to be eaten. It's there to be eaten.
It's probably fine if you take the pigs in the blanket, as long as you don't take the actual platter that,
Well, if they really wanted you to have one piece, they'll put it on tiny little plates, okay? If they give you a big plate with a lot on it, listen,
it's all for you.
In our culture, we're very hospitable, to the point where it's like, when your mother feeds you and she keeps giving you food, and she's like, you need to eat, you need to, you know.
Yes.
Now take that plus kind of sometimes the need to show off a little bit. Some people might kind of not agree with me there, but sometimes you just put on a spread just to kind of go, ha ha ha, look at all the food we have, you know. So for us to kind of go and see little hors d'oeuvres and it's like a little toothpick, and you go, okay, I'm gonna take this tray. Where's where's everyone else's food? It's hard to kind of get people to part with their time or their money, even, you know, to raise and help and support. How much of your time is spent on that?
It's all of that. Yes. It's definitely, I feel so privileged to be able to connect people with their passions. So maybe you have that job that gives you the money and the vacation and send your kids to college and all of that. But you come home at the end of the day and you're like, I moved piles of paper from one side of my desk to the other side of my desk. I sent
There's a little scribbling in between. You might scribble on a piece of paper and then move it right, okay? It's not always just lifting the paper from left to right. You might have to pause and scribble something down.
Right. But maybe put it in a third pile before it goes to the next pile. Right. But you get home and you think, what did I do today? What did I do to help my neighbor? What did I do to make the world a better place? What did I do to shift the government into supporting things I care about, or mobilize my friends and family to solve a problem that we see in our neighborhood? And that's really where volunteering comes in. And I joked a little bit before about my political philosophy degree, but in the States, I think we have such a culture here of that, because we, for the most part, whether people chose to come or not, most of the people who came, our ancestors came here on boats or trains or ships, and they left behind everything that they knew. They left behind their communities, they left behind their families, they left behind those built-in support systems, and they had to help each other out if they were going to survive. And so I think that's sort of where it starts to sink in. I would say, we were talking about masks. There's this idea of sort of rugged individualism as well. The government does not provide the kind of support in the United States that it does in other places. So you are dependent on this third sector, on charities, on nonprofit organizations to provide that safety net. We could have a whole conversation about that, whether it's right or wrong, but it is what it is. And, you know, I think that that's where a lot of this comes from. I can speak to my own personal experience. The volunteering that I do right now, we have a very large homelessness problem here in the San Francisco Bay Area. Housing is very expensive. The cost of living goes up and up and up, and the divide between the tech workers that make millions of dollars and the people who provide the services is just getting bigger and bigger. So it doesn't take much to end up, you know, living in your car, or if your car gets towed, living on the street. There aren't enough shelters. And every day I would get off the train and walk to my office, and I would walk past a dozen people that were sitting on the street looking for help, looking for a handout, didn't have a place to call home. And I didn't think that I could sort of financially give all of them individual money. And I also didn't think that that was going to actually solve the problem, because it doesn't matter how much money I hand out personally, the problem is systemic and we need to change it at a different level. So I started volunteering with the Justice and Diversity Center with a program called Project Homeless Connect, which connects people in need with the services in the city. So as a volunteer, I help people who have lost their government IDs get a free replacement ID. I walk them through the process. I help them fill out the paperwork. If we're doing it at an event, the DMV, our agency that issues licenses and IDs, is actually there to take pictures. But you know, it's free that day. It's covered by the city, the cost, and volunteers are helping navigate hundreds of people through this process. So that's one small thing that I could do. And honestly, there's not enough money in the world that you could pay me to have that be my job, right? It's hard, it's emotional, it's exhausting. I don't want to do that every day, but every month I can go and do that for 8 hours and know that I am chipping away at that problem that I see every morning and every evening when I walk to the train. So that's what we need to find as leaders of volunteers, as engagement professionals, that connection. What problem do you want to solve? How do you want to make a difference? How can I connect you with that so that at the end of the day or the end of the week or the end of the month, you think, I have made a difference. I've helped someone individually, or I've made this change. I've got 10 of my friends to write to their member of Congress about this bill, whatever that looks like, that they're taking action, because we can look around. We are, a global community now, and borders don't stop climate change, and borders don't stop migration, and all of these challenges are still out there. So we need to do more of that community engagement or social responsibility within our communities.
Is it, for someone in Qatar who is living here, working here, who's, a huge diverse population, people from all around the world are here. How do we get from a position of helping the community to then potentially creating jobs? If you have the right candidate for something and you want to push them to more, to excel in a certain career path, things like that. Is that something that is, at the core of your thinking when you're doing your job, or is it just spreading knowledge and awareness and making sure that the industry of volunteerism does not, get looked past in terms of the rest of the way the world works? Especially because you live in San Francisco. So that's why I'm asking you these questions.
I think it might be in the back of my mind when I see a volunteer that connects with something or has a real aptitude or passion for something, I might push or recommend or suggest. But as someone who's responsible for engaging volunteers in my organization, my primary responsibility is always to the mission. So am I meeting the mission of the organization, and am I creating meaningful opportunities for volunteers to get involved?
I just want to get to a point where I can start talking about your podcast. So there's no segue. My only question about that is, why did it take you 2 years?
To get the podcast up and going?
Yeah.
I have a primary job, and then I have a lot of other non-job jobs. And I will say that Toby Johnson, my podcast co-host, and I had a lot of really good intentions. And then when we got down to the nuts and bolts of making a podcast, we kind of hit some bumps in the road, having never done that before. We were sort of learning as we went. And I, at the time, was also the president of the board for the Council and Certification for Volunteer Administration. And that organization had a little bit of its own growing pains and some transition. And so that sort of became my other full-time job. And then the podcast.
Is there an international body of recognition, like an international certification body for volunteering? Is that the CVA?
The CVA, the Council for Certification in Volunteer Administration is international. We have CVAs from all around the world, including Saudi Arabia, one other country in your region of the world, certainly North America, South America. Europe and Australia are the bigger areas. But as volunteer engagement becomes sort of more of a recognized skill set and a profession, I think that need is spreading.
If I need to hire a community outreach manager and they have a CVA after their name, I should consider it.
It's a pretty rigorous exam. It's comprehensive, so it's not necessarily based on coursework. There is a textbook, but it's also based on experience. So the questions that are asked are situational. There isn't necessarily an answer in a book that you can find. It has to be based on your own experience and your professional development.
I saw like the prerequisites, I guess, if you would call them.
3 years of full-time work managing volunteers. That could be done more years at part-time. It doesn't have to be paid work. You could do it as a volunteer yourself. So a volunteer leader of volunteers. And the core competencies that the credential is based on cover all those things that you were talking about. It is both hard and soft skills. It's systems and data management, organizational management and change management, as well as sort of all those soft skills, communication and persuasion, and a huge piece of it is risk management.
I'm just going to be greedy and, ask you to say one thing to young people who have never volunteered before.
You never know what's out there. You never know what might spark passion in you, that thing that you might find that you really care about. It could be a future career. It could be a way to help someone or to help your community, and just give it a try. The great thing about volunteering is that it doesn't have to be forever. You can do it for an afternoon. You could do it for a week, or you could find something that you do for the rest of your life.
Lovely. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Hopefully our paths will cross again.
I would love that.
Maybe you'll be in Qatar giving some volunteer courses or setting up a volunteer society here. Maybe you never know. You never know what happens.